There is a quiet way to lose your life without ever making one dramatic mistake. You simply give away a few minutes here, a few reactions there, a few small promises you do not keep. You reach for the phone before you reach for your own mind. You answer the message while angry. You postpone the difficult task until your confidence returns. You allow one person's opinion to decide what kind of day you are permitted to have. Nothing looks catastrophic. That is what makes it dangerous. A life is rarely ruined in one event. More often it is shaped by repeated moments in which you surrender command of yourself and call it normal. The Stoics understood this long before digital notifications, endless feeds, and the strange exhaustion of being reachable every minute. They knew that character is not built in grand declarations. It is built in small encounters with impulse. And the encouraging part is this: if small acts of surrender can slowly weaken a person, small acts of discipline can slowly rebuild one. Not overnight, not through performance, but through 6 quiet habits practiced long enough that your nervous system begins to trust the person making the decisions. Most people say they want a different life. What they often mean is that they want different feelings while keeping the same patterns. They want less anxiety, but continue rehearsing imaginary disasters. They want self-respect, but continue negotiating with every craving. They want focus, but keep their attention surrounded by open doors, the phone beside the keyboard, the browser full of tabs, the mind full of conversations that ended 3 years ago. They want peace, but treat every thought as an instruction. A thought appears, they are judging me. You investigate it for an hour. A feeling appears, I do not want to do this. You treat it as a verdict. A notification appears. Someone needs something. You abandon the task in front of you before asking whether the interruption deserves your life. The hidden problem is not simply distraction, anger, or laziness. The hidden problem is unexamined obedience. You are being commanded by whatever arrives with the greatest emotional force. This is why a person can appear successful and still feel internally disorganized. They may meet deadlines, maintain an image, and speak confidently, while privately being pulled around by approval, resentment, fear, and comparison. I have watched people spend an entire evening trying to decode a short message, not because the message contained great complexity, but because uncertainty gave their imagination room to become cruel. I have watched capable people delay meaningful work, not because they lacked ability, but because beginning would expose them to the possibility of being ordinary, imperfect, or unseen. The modern world does not need you to be evil to profit from your instability. It only needs you to be reactive. A reactive person clicks more, compares more, purchases more, argues more, and rests less. But the cost is personal. Every time you make your mood dependent on what happens outside you, you hand over a portion of your authority. The Stoic project begins there, not with becoming emotionless, and not with pretending that disappointment does not hurt. It begins with noticing the moment when an event ends and your interpretation begins. Epictetus opens the Enchiridion with a distinction that is simple enough to memorize and demanding enough to occupy a lifetime. Some things are up to us and some things are not. He names our judgments, desires, aversions, and actions as belonging to us. Other people's bodies, possessions, reputations, and outcomes do not. This is not a slogan about pretending you control nothing. It is a map of where effort can actually work. You do not control whether the message is answered. You control whether you send a second message designed to force reassurance. You do not control whether your work is praised. You control whether you do the work carefully when praise is absent. You do not control whether someone recognizes your loyalty. You control whether your loyalty is expressed with dignity rather than used as a bargain for approval. The Stoics were not asking you to lower your standards. They were asking you to stop attaching your peace to conditions you cannot command. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." The point is not that every obstacle is secretly pleasant. The point is that reality does not have to cooperate before virtue becomes possible. The delay can become patience. The rejection can become clarity. The insult can become a test of restraint. The difficult morning can become evidence that your principles are not dependent on comfort. This is where the 6 habits enter. They are not tricks for manufacturing a perfect personality. They are repeated ways of returning to the only territory where lasting change can occur: the next thought, the next action, the next restraint. The first loss happens before behavior. It happens in the courtroom of the mind. An event occurs and almost immediately you create a story around it. Your manager gives brief feedback and the story becomes, "I am failing." A friend declines an invitation and the story becomes, "I am unwanted." You make a mistake and the story becomes, "This proves what I have always feared." The mind does not merely report reality. It predicts, labels, and fills gaps. Modern psychology describes this as a tendency to interpret ambiguous information through existing beliefs. The Stoics put it more directly. It is not always the impression that injures us, but the judgment we add to it. So the first habit is small enough to practice in a single breath. Name the impression before obeying it. When anxiety rises, say silently, "I am noticing the impression that something is wrong." Not, "Everything is wrong." Not, "Everything is wrong." Not, "I cannot handle this." Just the clean observation. When anger rises, say, "I am noticing the impression that I have been disrespected." That sentence creates a narrow space between stimulus and response. In that space, you can ask a better question. What is actually known? What am I adding? What response would I respect tomorrow? This is not weakness. It is intellectual honesty. The undisciplined person thinks certainty is strength. The disciplined person can tolerate the discomfort of not knowing yet. Try it the next time you receive criticism. Before defending yourself, write down the observable facts in one column and your interpretation in another. "The project was returned for revision" is a fact. "They think I am incompetent" is an interpretation. You may eventually decide the interpretation has evidence, but you no longer confuse a fear with a fact. That single habit changes the emotional climate of a life. You become less available to manipulation, including manipulation by your own imagination. But seeing clearly is not enough. A person can understand every pattern and still remain unchanged if comfort always wins. This is where the second loss begins, the slow construction of a life organized around relief. You open the phone because the task feels difficult. You watch another episode because silence feels unfamiliar. You keep checking the person who rejected you because uncertainty is more stimulating than acceptance. You tell yourself you are recovering, researching, preparing, waiting for the right mood. Sometimes rest is necessary, but rest restores you. Avoidance makes the future heavier. Seneca warned that we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. His insight reaches beyond fear. We also suffer in the imagined effort of beginning. Before the workout, the conversation, the application, or the honest apology, the mind inflates the discomfort until avoidance feels like wisdom. The second habit is therefore a deliberate beginning before emotional permission arrives. Reduce the task to its first physical movement. Open the document. Put on the shoes. Write the first imperfect sentence. Place the phone in another room and work for 10 minutes. Do not negotiate with the entire mountain. Put your hand on the first stone. This matters because motivation is often a consequence, not a prerequisite, of action. Changing the environment and initiating a small behavior can reduce the friction of continuation. The Stoic version is more moral. You do not wait to feel like the person you intend to become. You act in a way that gives that identity somewhere to live. A person who waits for confidence remains dependent on mood. A person who begins while uncertain discovers that confidence can be built from kept appointments with the self. Notice the difference. One person says, "I will focus when I feel less scattered." The other clears one surface, sets one boundary and begins. One asks, "Do I feel ready?" The other asks, "What is the next honorable action?" Over 6 months, these are not equal choices. One produces explanations. the other produces evidence. And then comes the most expensive loss of all, resentment disguised as identity. You begin to define yourself by what happened to you. The betrayal becomes your proof that people cannot be trusted. The rejection becomes your proof that you are not enough. The difficult childhood, unfair workplace, or missed opportunity becomes a permanent permission slip to remain guarded, bitter, or passive. Your pain may be real. Your explanation may even be understandable. But if you keep returning to it as a source of identity, it begins to charge rent. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly reminded himself that other people's ignorance was not an excuse for abandoning his own nature. He did not deny that people could be selfish or cruel. He refused to let their behavior recruit him into becoming a lesser version of himself. The third habit is an evening audit of ownership. At the end of the day, ask 3 questions. Where did I act from principle? Where did I hand my authority to an impulse or another person? What is one repair I can make tomorrow? Do not turn this into self-punishment. An audit is not a trial. It is a return to the controls. Maybe you lost an hour to scrolling. Maybe you spoke sharply to someone who did not deserve it. Maybe you avoided a task and then blamed the lack of time. Name it without theatrics. Then identify the smallest repair, delete the app for a week, apologize without explanation, schedule the task before checking messages. This practice prevents a mistake from becoming a personality. You are not a distracted person because you were distracted today. You are a person who noticed a breach and is now responsible for closing it. Without that distinction, shame often creates the very repetition it claims to condemn. You feel bad, seek relief, repeat the behavior, and then use the repetition as evidence that change is impossible. The audit breaks the loop. It converts vague guilt into specific responsibility. At some point, every serious change becomes less romantic. You stop asking whether the habit is inspiring. You stop waiting for a dramatic morning when the old self disappears. You realize that self-command is usually quiet, repetitive, and occasionally boring. The turning point is not when you feel powerful. It is when you stop making your feelings the final authority. You can be afraid and still tell the truth. You can be tired and still keep a small promise. You can be disappointed and still refuse to punish someone who did not cause the original wound. You can want recognition and still do work that may remain unseen. This is not emotional suppression. Suppression says, I must not feel this. Stoic discipline says, I feel this, and I will decide what it means and what I do next. The difference is immense. I have found that people often change when they become more tired of betraying themselves than they are afraid of discomfort. Not tired in a dramatic, cinematic sense. Tired of the private contradiction, speaking about discipline while constantly making exceptions, claiming to value peace while feeding resentment, saying that relationships matter while remaining too proud to communicate honestly. At that point, the question changes. It is no longer, how do I get rid of this feeling? It becomes, what kind of person will this feeling train me to become if I obey it? That question is a doorway. The fourth habit is a morning appointment with what is actually yours. Before the world places its demands in your mind, take 5 minutes to write 3 lines. What is within my control today? What difficulty am I willing to meet without complaint? What quality do I want my actions to express? Do not write a fantasy schedule. Write a field of responsibility. Within my control, my preparation, my tone, my attention, my next decision. Difficulty, an uncomfortable conversation, focused work, uncertainty about an outcome. Quality, courage, patience, fairness, precision. This internal discipline of thought changes the first battle of the day. Instead of waking and immediately asking what the world wants from you, you establish how you intend to meet it. The fifth habit is a protected block of undivided attention. Choose one meaningful task and give it a defined period without the phone, unnecessary tabs, or constant checking. It may be 25 minutes at first. The duration is less important than the integrity of the appointment. Digital overstimulation trains the mind to expect novelty every few seconds. As a result, ordinary effort begins to feel like deprivation. You are not necessarily incapable of focus. You may simply have practiced interruption more than concentration. So practice the opposite. Let one task be temporarily enough. During that block, boredom is not a signal to escape. It is the mind adjusting to the absence of novelty. Frustration is not proof that the work is wrong. It is often the sensation of staying long enough to cross the shallow resistance at the beginning. The weak behavior is to protect your attention only when everyone else is respectful of it. The disciplined behavior is to build boundaries before the world volunteers them. Silence notifications. Tell people when you are available. Put the device outside reach. Make the desired behavior easier and the impulsive behavior slightly inconvenient. This is not about becoming unreachable. It is about becoming reachable by choice. The sixth habit is a daily act of voluntary restraint. Once a day, decline one unnecessary impulse. Do not check the reaction. Do not make the purchase. Do not add the final argument. Do not explain yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you. Leave a small portion of comfort untouched. Not to punish yourself, but to remember that desire can speak without becoming your commander. Restraint is often misunderstood as severity. In reality, it is a form of self-respect. If every urge receives immediate obedience, you gradually teach yourself that you cannot be trusted with freedom. Begin modestly. Take one walk without audio. Eat one meal without a screen. Wait 10 minutes before replying to an irritating message. Keep one promise that no one else will know about. The point is not deprivation. The point is sovereignty. A person who cannot endure a little boredom becomes vulnerable to any distraction. A person who cannot endure being misunderstood becomes vulnerable to performance. A person who cannot endure craving becomes vulnerable to the environment that designed the craving. Voluntary restraint gives you back the ability to choose slowly. And there is a final layer beneath all three practices: the discipline of self-respect in relationships. Do not confuse Stoicism with tolerating every behavior. You can remain calm and still leave what repeatedly violates your values. You can forgive without reopening the door. You can care about someone without making their approval the measure of your worth. The disciplined response is not always silence. Sometimes it is a clear boundary, delivered without revenge. This is where masculine steadiness at its best becomes different from posturing. It is not loudness, domination, or emotional distance. It is the capacity to remain accountable, honest, and composed when the easier options are either collapse or control. After 6 months, the visible changes may appear ordinary. You may check the phone less often, finish more work, recover faster after criticism, speak with less defensiveness, sleep with fewer unfinished arguments circling your mind. You may still have bad days. The difference is that a bad day no longer automatically becomes a bad identity. You begin to understand that peace is not the absence of disturbance. It is the presence of a reliable inner procedure for meeting disturbance. You name the impression. You begin before you feel ready. You audit the day. You set your direction before the noise arrives. You protect your attention. You practice restraint. These are small habits, but together they create a person who is harder to purchase with praise and harder to break with insult. You stop needing every rule to confirm your value. You stop treating rejection as a verdict delivered by the universe. You stop confusing intensity with truth. A strong feeling may be important, but it is not automatically wise. Anger can reveal a boundary and still recommend a destructive response. Anxiety can identify uncertainty and still exaggerate its consequences. Desire can point toward pleasure and still lead away from purpose. The mature person does not wage war against these signals. He listens, evaluates, and chooses. That is what the Stoics were building, not a stone, not a machine, not an unfeeling man, but a human being whose principles remain available under pressure. Seneca wrote, No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself. The value of difficulty is not that it makes suffering good. It is that difficulty reveals whether your philosophy exists beyond language. Every interruption asks whether your attention belongs to you. Every slight asks whether your dignity depends on retaliation. Every delay asks whether your effort was only a bargain for quick results. Every lonely evening asks whether you can remain in your own company without immediately fleeing into noise. The answer is practiced, not announced. 6 months from now, you will have lived 6 months either way. The question is not whether you will encounter distraction, anxiety, rejection, temptation, or difficult people. You will. The question is whether those encounters will continue to write your character for you. You can begin tomorrow morning with one page that separates what is yours from what is not. You can name the next anxious impression instead of becoming it. You can start the task before confidence arrives. You can examine the day without self-deception. You can protect one block of attention. You can practice one small refusal that reminds you your impulses are not your master. None of this guarantees the outcome you want. Stoicism never promised that. It offers something more durable, the ability to remain worthy of yourself while the outcome is uncertain. Do not admire this philosophy from a distance. Use it when the message goes unanswered. Use it when the work is tedious. Use it when you are misunderstood. Use it when no one is watching and the old pattern offers immediate relief. That is where the life changes, not in the declaration, but in the moment of choice that used to pass unnoticed. If this resonated with you, leave a like. In the comments, write the line or insight that struck you hardest. And subscribe for grounded Stoic philosophy and self-mastery without the noise. You do not need to conquer your entire life today. You only need to stop abandoning yourself in the next moment, and then do it again tomorrow.